The day I understood what I was worth to my own daughter, I was standing at a pharmacy counter on Dunlop Street with a prescription in my hand and nowhere to go with it. Not because I was broke. I want to be clear about that right from the start, because I know exactly how these stories tend to land, and I know what people picture when an older man describes a moment like this. They picture someone desperate, someone with nothing left. That wasn't me. I had savings. I had a GIC maturing in 60 days that would have made $342, look like the change you leave in a tray at a Tim Hortons. But 60 days might as well be 60 years when you're standing at a counter with a pharmacist explaining very patiently, very carefully that your Ontario Drug Benefit Plan doesn't cover the full cost of one of the two medications your surgeon prescribed post-surgery, and the Trillium copay calculation leaves a gap of $342, and they need it in full before they can dispense. $342. Hold that number in your head. I'm going to bring it back around, and when I do, you're going to feel it the same way I felt it standing under those fluorescent lights in February. My name is Donald Kerr. I'm 67 years old, retired electrician. 38 years of pulling wire through walls across this part of Ontario. Schools, hospitals, new builds out toward Innisfil and Essa Township, commercial work downtown Barrie. A decade of residential out along the Lake Road where the summer people kept wanting more and more light in rooms that were already bright enough. The kind of work you do with your whole body until your body decides it's had enough of the arrangement. My left knee went first, back in 2019. My right hip followed last January. Bone on bone, my surgeons said, the way you'd describe weather. Like it was simply a condition of the world and not a thing that had been grinding quietly through me for years while I told myself it wasn't that bad. I live on Kozlov Street with my wife, Edith, 41 years married. We raised one daughter in this house, in this neighborhood, 3 blocks from Centennial Beach, where she learned to ride a bicycle, and later to drive a car and eventually drove herself south to Bradford, where she and her husband bought a detached place with a double garage and more yard than they've ever known what to do with. That's the thing about distance. It looks like space until it starts to feel like something else. I need you to understand who I was before February. I was not a complicated man. I worked, I paid what I owed, I helped where I could, and stayed quiet where I couldn't. The one thing I said to Edith so many times, she eventually stopped responding to it. I never wanted to be a burden to my daughter. Whatever happened to my body, whatever the years took from me, I didn't want her carrying me. That belief, that quiet, stubborn pride, that's the thing that cost me. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Get comfortable, because this isn't a story that moves in a straight line. Hit that like button before you forget. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You're going to want to stay for all of it. Hip surgery at Royal Victoria Regional went as well as these things go. Home by the second day. Physio 3 times a week at a clinic on Bayfield Street. The hard part wasn't the pain exactly. Pain you can work with. Pain gives you something to push against. The hard part was the negotiation. Every small movement required the kind of deliberate attention you're not used to giving your own body at 67. Bending. Sitting. Getting yourself from one end of the hallway to the other at 3 in the morning without waking Edith. Post-surgery, my family doctor had me on 2 medications, an anti-inflammatory and a blood thinner for clot risk, both on the ODB formulary, mostly. The anti-inflammatory had a coverage gap. My Trillium plan's copay structure left me $342 short on that one. My supplemental coverage through the Retired Electricians Association had already processed a claim earlier in the year, and the reimbursement cycle for a secondary claim ran 4 to 6 weeks. I could submit. I would be covered, but the pharmacy needed the full amount today, and 4 to 6 weeks was not today. So I did what a father does. I called my daughter. I was careful about how I framed it. I said it was a timing thing. I said I was fine, that Edith was fine, that this was just an administrative gap in the coverage and not anything to worry about. I asked her if she could e-transfer me $342, that I'd pay it back the moment my GIC came through. That 60 days was the outside edge of it. I said I hated to ask. She said, and I'm going to quote her as exactly as I can because the words haven't left me, "Oh, Dad, I'm really sorry. We are just stretched so thin right now. The mortgage, the kids skating, our insurance went up again. It's just a really bad month. Let me ask him and see." Him was her husband. "Let me ask him," she said, as though the question of whether her father received his post-surgical medication was a matter requiring committee review. I told her not to worry about it. She said she'd call me back that afternoon. She didn't call back. I drove home from the pharmacy with the one prescription I could cover, and I didn't say much to Edith about the rest of it. She worries the way water finds cracks, through everything, around everything. And I didn't want her on the phone to our daughter, turning a logistical problem into something permanent. I sat at the kitchen table and I cut the anti-inflammatory in half with a sharp knife. Not scientific, not the way you're supposed to manage post-surgical medication. Half a dose, morning and evening. Enough to tell myself I was doing something useful with a situation I had no other way to manage. I went to bed that night and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about what $342 actually meant in the context of my life. I'd pulled wire through walls to save for my daughter's education. I'd written checks for deposits on things I couldn't easily afford so she could have what other kids had. I'd never once asked her to account for any of it, because that's not what love is supposed to look like. That's not the ledger a parent is supposed to keep. But I was keeping one now quietly, whether I'd meant to or not. I got up around 11, careful with the hip, and I went to the back room. I have a wire-bound logbook on my desk, the kind I used for years to track invoices and client notes, and I opened it to a clean page. I wrote the date. I wrote, "Pharmacy, $342, declined." Then I sat there for a moment, with the pen in my hand, looking at those words in my own handwriting, under that small lamp, and something settled in me the way things settle when you stop fighting a feeling and just let yourself have it. Not rage. I want to be clear about that too. This wasn't hot. This was cold and specific and very, very still. The kind of clarity you get when you stop being polite to yourself about what you've just understood. I closed the logbook, clicked the pen shut, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep for a long time. 3 days later, Edith was on her tablet at the kitchen table. She does that in the evenings now, scrolling through things, which took me a while to get used to, but I've made my peace with it. And she made a sound that I knew immediately was not a good sound. Not a word, a sound. The particular kind that means she's seen something she doesn't know how to carry. She turned the tablet toward me. My son-in-law's social media, he keeps his profile open, always has, because I think some part of him likes knowing people can see what he's doing. A video he'd posted that morning. Before and after. His mother's kitchen out in their place in Newmarket. A dated thing, the kind of kitchen that accumulates years on it. Completely redone. New cabinetry all the way to the ceiling, quartz countertop, subway tile backsplash, under cabinet lighting, what looked like new appliances along the far wall. The kind of job I'd priced enough of in my working years to put a number on quickly. 15,000 on the low end. 18 was more likely. Could have been 22 if those were high-end cabinets. The caption read, "Surprised mom with a kitchen she's always deserved. Family first." Family first. My daughter had left a heart in the comments. I handed the tablet back to Edith. I told her the kitchen looked nice. She looked at me for a long time, the way she's looked at me across 41 years of tables and mornings and difficult silences. "Donald," she said. "I know," I said, "not tonight." I slept poorly again. The next morning I took the full dose of the anti-inflammatory, because my pension had cleared, and I'd driven to the pharmacy on my own and paid the $342 out of my own pocket, in cash, the way I should have been able to the first time, without asking anybody for anything. Standing at that counter, feeling the cost of it not in money but in something I didn't have a name for yet, I thought, this is the last time I let being polite cost me my own care. Then my son-in-law called on a Saturday. He did not mention the medication, not once. He called with the easy, comfortable energy of a man who has never considered that consequences might have his address. He wanted to talk about my GC renewal coming up, about getting me set up properly, about maybe having a conversation with their financial planner, someone who could simplify things for a man at my stage of life. My stage of life. I told him that sounded fine and we should talk about it over dinner sometime. He said absolutely great, took care. We hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute and a half. Then I called Daphne Abreu. Daphne has been my lawyer since I incorporated my business in 2001. She is not a person who is easily surprised, which is precisely why I've kept her. I laid out what had happened, not emotionally, just sequentially, the way you'd describe a circuit problem to another tradesman. The medication, the call to my daughter, the 3 days on half doses, the kitchen reveal on social media, the call about simplifying my finances. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't open any joint accounts. Don't give anyone access to anything. And call me back when you have the full picture." The full picture came 11 days later, delivered by hand. My son-in-law's father appeared on my front step on a Tuesday afternoon without calling ahead. He was wearing his heavy coat, hat in his hand, and he had a plain white envelope that he was holding slightly away from himself, the way you carry something you're not entirely comfortable carrying. I want to tell you something about this man, because he matters to this story in a way I still think about. He is 72, retired. He spent close to 3 decades in commercial lending at one of the big banks before moving into credit union consulting work, and what that kind of career gives you, if you do it honestly, is an absolute intolerance for numbers that don't add up. He had watched his son with the patient, worried attention of a man who has known for a long time what he's looking at, but keeps choosing to believe he might be wrong. He stood in my doorway and he said, "Donald, I need you to take something. Read it before you talk to my son again, before you sign anything, before any of that." I took the envelope. He met my eyes. "He's my son," he said quietly, "but you raised a daughter, same as I raised him, and you didn't deserve this." He left without coming in. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened the envelope. The first pages were a home equity line of credit application. My daughter and her husband listed as co-applicants. I expected that much. They'd mentioned refinancing the Bradford place. What I did not expect was the third page. Under the section for additional income verification, there was a statutory declaration, the kind a lender uses to confirm cosigner assets. It named a cosigner. It listed that cosigner's CPP income, OAS benefit, and a GIC valued at just under $200,000 maturing within 60 days. The cosigner was me. I had never seen that form. I had not signed it. The signature at the bottom, careful, close enough to mine to pass a quick review, was not mine. In plain terms, my son-in-law had declared my retirement savings as collateral on a credit line, without my knowledge, without my consent, using a signature that was not my own. If he defaulted on that line, the lender would have grounds to pursue the assets listed in that statutory declaration. My GIC, the money Edith and I had set aside for whatever time we had left in this house. He had used my name to pay for his mother's kitchen renovation. He had done it the same week. His wife told me $342 was more than they could spare. I sat at that table until Edith came downstairs. I showed her the pages the same way I'd have shown her a contractor's estimate that didn't match the job, calmly, clearly, page by page. I watched her face do what it does when something breaks it piece by piece, not all at once. When she set the papers down, her hands were flat on the table, and she wasn't saying anything. "Did she know?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. That was the honest answer then. It's still the honest answer now. I called Daphne that afternoon. She asked 4 very precise questions and then told me we had work to do, and a narrow window before the GIC matured into something easy to access. I will not walk you through every detail of what happened in the next 3 weeks, because those details belong in a conversation with your own lawyer, not in a story on the internet. What I can tell you is that by the time my GIC cleared, the money was no longer sitting in a place my son-in-law's paperwork could reach it. It was structured, it was directed, and it was going somewhere that had nothing to do with anyone else's renovation. We had the family dinner on a Sunday in March. Edith made her chicken pie, pastry from scratch the way she's always done it, the smell of it working through the house for 2 hours before anyone arrived. She wanted it to feel like a normal Sunday. I let her want that. She'd earned one more evening of trying. My daughter and her husband arrived together. She came in the way she does when she suspects something is off. Carefully cheerful, making conversation that costs her something. He came in the way he always does, filling the space, comfortable in it, talking about the highway traffic and the weather and how good the house smelled. My son-in-law's father arrived 10 minutes after I had invited him. The look on my son-in-law's face when he saw his father standing in my front hallway was the first completely honest expression I'd seen from him in weeks. We ate. We talked about nothing real. The grandchildren's hockey schedules, the Leafs doing the thing the Leafs always do, whether spring was actually coming or just threatening to. My son-in-law held his confidence all the way through dessert. I watched him decide, over the course of that meal, that his father's presence meant nothing dangerous. He held on to that decision right up until Edith started clearing plates, and I asked her to leave them and sit down. The room changed. I set a folder on the table. I had a short letter from Daphne's office and 3 pages of documentation. I didn't open it right away. "You mentioned wanting to help manage my finances," I said to my son-in-law. "Now that the GIC's cleared, let's talk about exactly how that's been managed." He smiled, the smile of a man who is still certain he is ahead of something. 3 weeks ago, I said, I finalized an irrevocable family trust with my lawyer. As of last Friday, the GIC proceeds have been transferred into it. The trust has one named beneficiary, the Simcoe County Seniors Medication Access Fund, a not-for-profit I have asked Daphne's office to help me establish. Its purpose is to cover prescription cost gaps for seniors in this region who fall through the cracks in provincial drug coverage. I paused. It starts at $342. That number felt appropriate. The smile was gone. Neither of you is listed as a beneficiary, I said to my daughter, as gently as I could. That is not a punishment. It is a consequence. There is a difference. My son-in-law found words first. That is, Dad, that's completely out of proportion. We had one difficult month. You had one difficult month, I said, and I spent 14 days cutting post-surgical medication in half to get through it. At the same time, you spent somewhere north of $15,000 on a kitchen for your mother. Those were your choices. This is mine. The money for that was already committed? I know about the statutory declaration, I said. The table went absolutely quiet. He looked at his father. Tell him, my son-in-law said. His voice had changed. Harder now, less composed. Tell him you came here to help sort this out. His father set his fork down very carefully. He looked at his son the way a man looks when he has already grieved something, and is now just in the part that comes after grief. I came here, he said quietly, because you put your father-in-law's name and his retirement savings on a statutory declaration he never agreed to and never signed. I found the paperwork. I couldn't look at Donald and pretend I hadn't. My daughter said, What declaration? I slid the pages across the table. I watched her read them. I watched the color leave her face page by page, and I watched her hand come up to cover her mouth, and I watched her look at her husband with an expression I recognized because I'd worn something like it myself, standing at a pharmacy counter in February. The look of someone who has just had to revise what they thought they knew about where they stood in their own life. You told me you saved for that renovation, she said to him. He didn't answer. You told me we saved. The room held that for a moment. She looked at me. Dad, just the one word. Her voice broke cleanly on it. I know, I said. I didn't know about the declaration. I need you to believe that. I do believe it, I said, and I meant it. It didn't change the folder in front of her, didn't change what I'd built with Daphne, didn't give me back the 14 days of half doses. But I meant it, and I think she needed to hear me say it out loud, and I wasn't going to withhold that from her on top of everything else. My son-in-law left before coffee. No scene, no slammed door. Just gone. The quiet kind of departure that happens when a man runs out of room to perform anything. His father stayed long enough to finish his tea, to tell Edith the chicken pie was exceptional and that she should be proud of it, and to give me one last look on his way out. The look of a man who did the right thing and knows it will cost him something at home. Edith and I sat at the table after everyone had gone. She was crying, the tired kind of crying that comes after you've held it together through dinner. I stayed with her until she was done. What happens to our daughter now? She asked. That depends on her, I said. The fraud referral went through Daphne's office to the appropriate authorities. Where it lands is not entirely my decision, and I've made my peace with that. My daughter was staying with her sister-in-law for a while, working out what she was working out. She called me twice in those first weeks. The first call she mostly cried. I mostly listened. The second call she asked me directly if there was any way to change the trust. I told her the trust was irrevocable by design and that what she'd lost wasn't money. I'm not angry at you, I said. I'm finished pretending I'm worth less than what you were willing to spend on his side of the family. That's all this is. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm sorry, Dad, I don't know if that's enough. It's a start, I said. A start isn't nothing. That was 4 months ago. Now it's September, and I'm in my garage on a Saturday morning, with the door open and the light coming in sideways the way it does at this hour in Ontario. That particular autumn light that makes everything look like it's worth taking care of. I'm refinishing a set of old cabinet doors I picked up at an estate sale in the spring. My hands need to be doing something. The hip lets me stand for a couple of hours now without arguing about it. Edith comes out with 2 mugs of coffee and sets one on the workbench beside me. She doesn't say anything for a moment. We watch a gray squirrel make a bad decision in the cedar tree at the back of the yard. She called again last night, Edith says. I know. She left a voicemail. Are you going to call her back? I think about that. I think about a woman who is 67 years old and has spent 41 years of his life not asking for very much from the people he loved. I think about a pharmacy counter in February and a logbook with 2 lines in it and a man who finally stopped being polite about what he was worth. Yes, I say, when I'm ready. Edith puts her hand on my arm, just for a moment warm through the flannel, and then she goes back inside. I go back to the cabinet door. The wood is older than it looks. Underneath 3 coats of old paint, there's good solid grain, the kind of material that holds up for decades when it's properly looked after. Some things are worth the work it takes to restore them. Some people are too. You just can't do that work for them. You can only leave the door open and let them decide whether they're ready to walk through it. I go back to sanding, the September light holds. I'm not in any hurry.